Hey, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've subscribed. I really appreciate it. My name's Riddle, and we're going to meander through my garden while I share with you some thoughts I have on particular things that are happening in our country right now. So I'm from a generation that's in between, the old generation and the new generation. I believe in logical thinking, and I believe in doing what's best for everyone. Now, please don't confuse that idea with socialism, and that's what bothers me is, as soon as you want to embrace this idea of fairness and creating an equal playing field for everyone, automatically people call you a socialist. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and I saw the effects of inequality. And when people are desperate and they don't have the basic tools to improve themselves, to take care of their children, to educate, this creates crime. And crime creates generational poverty. It creates heartache for everybody. So my concept is I want everyone to have at least the opportunity to have enough and be prosperous, because I don't want people coming after what I've worked so hard for. And if you think that's socialism, I want you to live in a ghetto for a while. I want you to live in a violent, desperate community that is a food desert. Now, going forward with this topic, I want to explain to you that I saw Oprah this morning, and she was arguing arguing the fact, or bringing to the front lines the fact that the African community has been hit disproportionately with the coronavirus. So this is what freaks me out about people's thinking, because we are not taught to critically think. Critical thinking is doing, taking data, looking at statistics, looking at history, and pulling this all together to come up with an answer, a solution. I believe that society, but especially America, has become this drama-motivated society. And the problem with drama is it's not really compassionate, it's fake compassion, because there's no solution to it. The reason that, and drama avoids the real issues. There's this underlying politically correct methodology that just truly, it's a form of like pity. And to me, pity is a form of disrespect, and it keeps people exactly where they were before. And the reason I'm laying all this groundwork before I go into what I'm going to say is that often people misunderstand or are offended by my logical thinking. So, growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and also with, very blue-collar, working poor parents, the one fact is that most Americans, but especially the working poor and the black community, the majority, eat horribly. They're taught generationally to eat horribly. Because of their poor diets, this leads to all those underlying health conditions that made them vulnerable to the disease. Because, as we're learning more and more every year, it's the immune system that protects us from the majority of diseases, even cancer, unless it's something genetic. So, that being said, you go to the next fact, that in most poor communities across the nation, the Indian reservations, anywhere that there's poverty, there's no access to fresh food, affordable food. But this, my friends, is a double-edged sword. Because even if tomorrow you were to fill that corner market in Detroit with kale and organic salad, would the people eat it? There has to be not only a push from the people to support getting nutritious food to the most vulnerable. We have plenty of it. Right now, we're throwing it away by the tons because there's no way to distribute it with this virus, with the pandemic. Not only do we have to get it to the people, but they need to be re-educated. And this is where the African-American community and America in a whole has to understand that we need to change our eating habits, because it's not about just tasting good and being cheap. It's your body. And if your body doesn't get the basics of basic nutrition, it cannot fight off disease. And it will leave you the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable. So that's why there's never an easy answer with this. Everyone will blame, the African American community is going to blame the government and the 1% for blocking them to have the ability to affordable, nutritious food. But then when you go to these impoverished, crime-ridden neighborhoods, my experience was most people can't even open a restaurant or a store there because it's consistently attacked by people who are convinced that they don't have any other options and are trying to exploit resources. So how do you open up something healthy, something dynamic, something higher vibrational, an organic market, or a market that has a wider selection of healthy food for the people when it's not safe? The people aren't safe. So this is where the community has to take control. There's only so much that we can do to help the community, but there is a deep responsibility of these communities taking a hard look at themselves and putting their foot down and doing anything they have to do to reverse that, the cultural violence that exists and the repression that exists inside of the community. Because once that's eased, and I don't know how to do this, I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a psychologist, but I believe once that is eased, then it'll be much easier for the doors to open up, to bring the resources in. Because nutrition is more than just the immune system. Nutrition is also builds the brain. So it's very diabolical that since the times of the slaves, that African Americans in mass have been experiencing poor nutrition. And now I'm going to tell you a really crazy radical story in regards to that. I have a dear friend, and she has a doctorate in economics from Carnegie Mellon, and her family are all economists. And, I've been an artist most of my life, incredibly naive, and when I would bring up different intense social issues or environmental issues, she would always describe things to me real world. In other words, through economics. And often it offended me, it shocked me, but it was real. It was reality. And reality's hard, but reality is what this three-dimensional world has to offer us right now. So the story was, she told me that they had a family friend who did a study. It went over 15 years. And what he did, the goal of the study was to go to the South and to try to decipher and get statistics on the quality of life that the slaves had on the plantations. The problem was there was so little written information and documentation from the slave side that it was just extremely biased, towards the white slave owners. So they had to go about doing this study by measuring doorways and beds and accumulating fragments But slowly, as the story came together, they they discovered something extremely shocking. Extremely shocking. And this is what they discovered. And I believe that this is still happening today in variation. And some of it is actually self-chosen. Some of it is programming, cultural programming, just ignorance. And this is what they discovered. When a slave child was born, now this wasn't every single slave child, but for the majority of the slaves, the baby was considered, chattel, and it was considered worthless, less than livestock, because it could not produce anything yet, because it was an infant. So the child would be taken automatically from its mother and put into this makeshift nursery, and the mother was put back to work as soon as she possibly could. Then in these nurseries, because the child was thought to be so just a deficit because it couldn't produce yet, it wasn't even considered worth feeding. So what they would do is they would take bags of grease, suet, like animal suet, and fill these bags of grease up, and that's what the babies would nurse on. Like, they wouldn't even give the children their own mother's milk. So what happened is that the child initially would have not only stunted growth because they were being filled but not starved. And hear what I said just now, filled but not starved. Because if you look at the obesity rate in this country, it's shocking that you could be obese and be starving nutritionally. They also found that not only would the growth be stunted, but it would also damage their brains. This goes back to that old creepy stereotype that they used to have in cartoons and the mythology of the South, where they would show the Negroes and they were almost like, they portrayed them as almost retarded. Well, they found in this study that actually they were mentally damaged due through starvation, because these babies were not getting basic nutrition at a most crucial time of their lives. But then what they learned, the slave owners, this is just, I don't know if this was intentional or just dumb luck, is that around puberty, if they started feeding the children normally and with higher quality food, their physical bodies would grow normal size, but they would still have those damaged brains that were lethargic. And when you have people with lower intelligence and damaged brains, they're much easier to control. So they literally made generations and armies through starving the people of these very complacent slaves. Wow. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Now, that kind of information, I doubt very much is anywhere out there. And this is a story that an academic shared with me, coming from another academic. But now look at today's story and look at how many impoverished Americans, but we're putting the emphasis on the African American community, don't know any better, or they don't have anything else to eat but high fat, high carbohydrate, high sugar foods that are full of preservatives. I was watching this a show on Sunday, and they were kind of a saint. They were making this guy seem like a saint. He was a African American man who stayed in the ninth quadrant in New Orleans, and he kept his store open. And the community was very important, where it was very dependent on his little corner store. But then they were showing him stocking the shelves, and when I saw what he had on those shelves, what those people had to eat, oh my God, I would literally probably die in a year if I had to survive on that, on what he was offering them as sustenance. So what's the point of all this? The point of all this is to tell you that the reason that the African community and people, not only with pre-existing conditions, something I observed that I don't know will ever come out statistically, but I'm very curious about it. I was watching and they were showing this particular, now it was just one particular news bulletin, and they showed 7 men in New York City who had died from the coronavirus. And the one thing that all 7 men had in common is that they were all obese. To me, I think there's something to it. If you want to be healthy and you want to avoid disease, you have to learn how to eat. You have to either grow or find the resources to have a balanced diet and to have nutrition in your life. If the African community is going to survive the future and is going to survive pandemics like this, the churches, which is their nucleus, the community leaders are going to have to fight and reach out to people like Oprah, who appear to be so concerned and compassionate, to start re-educating the people how to eat and getting those resources for them. I don't know if that entails starting urban farms, which is actually happening in Detroit and a lot of places. I don't know what it's going to take to do that, because this isn't my fight. I'm not African American. I'm not in that community anymore. But if you want to look at the world with critical thinking and looking at it, trying to find solutions instead of victimizing people and accepting the status quo, then I believe this is the way we need to start sorting things out, through a combination of looking at history and applying facts, and then applying critical thinking, and then action. And that's my video for today. Thank you for taking this 18 minutes to listen to me. Please feel free to comment if it's a logical contribution to the conversation. I'm very communicative. If it's something ridiculous, I will just erase your comment. If you like my thought-provoking, money-saving tips, garden wisdom, and more, please hit that like button and subscribe, as time is money. And I want you to take care of yourselves and take care of each other, because I believe in these times of such poor leadership that how we treat each other on the streets, that's the ultimate reality.